All right, popular startup advice says you have to focus on a very small segment of customers when you're starting out, but that doesn't always jive with an equally important responsibility to deliver products that are accessible and inclusive for all. So, from disruptive to disastrous, my guest today has seen a lot of questionable attempts at striking this balance over their 20 years of product design. Let me introduce you to Amélie Lamont, founder of User Spacecraft and person with the coolest LinkedIn profile and headshot. You have to check it out. Amelie helps companies redesign broken systems by developing product strategies that convert, adapt, and thrive. So today's conversation has my brain aflutter. Get excited for this one. But first, welcome to this week's episode of Make Sense, a video podcast that simplifies complex issues at the intersection of tech and people. Or we try to. Whether you're totally hyped on artificial intelligence and ready for the robot takeover, or you want to crawl into a cave after deleting all of your social media accounts, I'm here with my guests to help make sense of what's going on so you can design yourself into the future. My name is Lindsay Tabus. I'm a product market fit strategist and innovation advisor. I've always been obsessed with designing technology for people. So let's get started dissecting today's topics. Amelie, how are you? Welcome.
Yeah, I'm well. Thank you for that intro. That was pretty great.
Fun, right?
Yeah, that was amazing.
I missed my calling as like a radio DJ or
I mean,
something.
there's still time if you want to do that, you know?
Plenty of time. Plenty of time. Thank you. So, first segment, crystal ball. What does the future hold? This is where I call out interesting predictions for this year, and the experts, my guests, tell us their hot take. This time, because I'm passionate about continuous learning and improvement. My last guest, I think we took 25 minutes to go through this, and it's supposed to be like very quick. Interesting conversation, but it's supposed to be quicker. So this time I'm going to do rapid fire. And Amelie, I want you to say, yes, I want that to happen,
Okay.
or no, please, no at the end. We'll pick one to talk about further. Okay.
Okay, cool.
Okay. Here we go. Artificial intelligence will gain multiple senses and smell will go digital.
Uh, mm, mm, no.
No.
Sorry, because you said yes or no, so I was like, I want to be in between, but fine,
No,
no.
no, please no. Got it. Okay. Next, VCs will stop hunting unicorns and start searching for workhorses.
No.
You don't want that to happen, or you
Uh,
don't think it's going to
I don't think
happen?
it's gonna happen. They'll never stop hunting for unicorns.
Right. Okay. I did talk with a previous guest that said if you don't have that unicorn that makes up for all your other losses, then you don't have a fund.
Wow. Wow, so you're basically saying, or they were basically saying that VCs just fail a lot. That's cool.
They do.
They
I
do, it's
mean,
true.
startups fail. It's probably the hardest part of being in the industry as long as we are, that there's a lot of our work that doesn't really see the light of day
True.
because most of the companies fail before it can get out there. So,
Facts.
all right, meant to be short and it can't be my fault.
Sorry.
Metaverse goes professional.
Yes.
Cool. All right. Social media users turn their back on the algorithm.
Yes.
Awesome. Age of the tech CEO hero will come to an end.
Yes.
Okay, desperate. Formation of the next wave of game-changing startups.
Yeah.
Okay, is it game-changing or next
Yeah.
wave?
Yeah, I was like, game change. Yeah. Yeah, I want to see that. But like, what does that
Yeah,
actually mean? I don't know.
right, right. It's a lot of words. Commercialization of the moon in earnest.
No.
Okay.
Leave the moon
All right.
alone.
Okay. Leave the moon alone. Okay. As promised, second segment, deep dive. Are there any of these that you're interested in talking about more? We've got AI gaining multiple senses, VCs stopping to stop hunting unicorns, metaverse in the professional world, social media turning their back on social media users turning their back on algorithms, age of the tech CEO hero come to an end, formation of the next wave of game-changing startups, or commercialization of the moon in earnest.
I want to talk about the commercialization of the moon in earnest. Like, what is that?
Yeah. Now this is going to be an example of like two non-experts kind of trying to figure out what this actually means. I think I was hoping once all of you look up how awesome Amelie's LinkedIn profile is, that you knew stuff about the commercialization of the moon and the solar system, but maybe you don't. This is what
No.
I can tell you. Of course, we know, the tech CEO heroes of like Jeff Bezos and what Mark Zuckerberg and Elon Musk are trying to get to the moon to kind of, space travel,
Yes.
commercialize space travel. Right? I think that there are companies that are pushing the boundaries of a lot of NASA IP as
Mm.
far as extending Wi-Fi or battery power and other things. Um, I didn't do well in electrical engineering classes, so I can't go into it. That's what I have seen.
Got it. Yeah. Hmm. I don't know how, I think I have to like sleep on that to like really think about how I feel about that. I already
Okay.
have thoughts about Mars, but I
What
haven't
can you
really.
share your thoughts on Mars? Because I would like to
Yeah,
know.
I think I think I was even watching a video last night where someone was talking with excitement about the colonization of Mars, and I was like, okay, that's an interesting phrase, given the colonization of places on planet Earth have not gone so very well. So, what does it mean to colonize Mars when there's no
Mars.
life on it that we know of? Um, and what does it mean for us, a few select people, to go to Mars to live there as the Earth is being destroyed by people who are still here? I don't know.
Right. So it kind of read between the lines. Do you think uh, Mars becomes the distraction for us so that we don't have to deal with our climate issues here?
Yeah, that's what it feels like to me personally.
Yeah. It doesn't feel like, oh, we just need to like secure a plan B, the just in case. It feels like we can just go somewhere else.
Yeah, I mean, that plan B doesn't sound too great when it feels like not only a select few will be able to engage in that plan B. So,
Right, and I appreciate pointing out that the word colonization is, not not the best. I was also thinking that we could maybe cover metaverse going professional. I don't know that these two have anything in common, but you did do a one episode podcast on the technology of the Black imagination and
yes,
anime.
yes.
And so I want to believe that the worlds you can imagine or that you've analyzed, the worlds you have analyzed and included in this podcast, and the metaverse, which is a world that we can make up on our own as too.
Hmm.
I just kind of want to bring those two together and see if what your comments, you were pretty like, yes, metaverse should go professional.
Yeah, I mean, I guess in my brain, I was kind of thinking of it as metaverse can go professional. I just feel like when I think of metaverse, I think the metaverse can contain anything that we know of, as well as everything that we don't know of yet. And so I feel like there are a few options. One option is professional means what we define it as today. Like maybe there is a version of a platform where you can add me to your network in the metaverse. Or there's another version where professional looks like something completely different that we can't even imagine or think of yet because we're not in that space to be able to cultivate the imagination for it.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think when I've heard about Metaverse going professional. Now, for those of you listening that don't know, I was an entrepreneur in residence with Techstars program in partnership with Comcast, NBC Universal, Lift Labs. So it's a mouthful, but there were a bunch of Metaverse startups in there. We went through a lot of Metaverse startups during our selection process this time last year. And, one problem that is in the future of work and the metaverse is with more companies being remote or having more remote days, the the water cooler talk isn't there, but I don't
Mhm.
want to talk about like water cooler talk as far as like the social let's be friends water cooler talk. But there's water cooler talk that helps, a new employee understand the organization more,
Yeah.
or helps a younger employee learn new concepts, or, informal training, informal learning and development. And we're missing that, right? We've got a whole couple years of young employees that haven't been in the office, don't understand like the organizational systems, don't have that context, and they're not getting that exposure because there's no water cooler. So how do we make the water cooler in the metaverse for that informal learning?
Yeah, I feel like you're touching on that serendipity as well, like the things that just happen randomly by happenstance when you're in a physical space. But I think this is something that I struggle with the metaverse a lot, is that as children, we are often, as we get older, we're taught to leave behind our creativity, and we're taught to think in a very concrete terms and to leave behind the abstract. And so for me, when I think about the metaverse, it feels very abstract. And what we tend to do is take what we know concretely and try to apply it to this abstract space where it might not necessarily work, but because we're so stuck in the tangible, concrete, we can't really think outside of that. And so I say all of this to say maybe the water cooler conversation or paradigm is something that doesn't work in the metaverse. Maybe there's something else that works for that serendipity that people are seeking or that we would want the next generation of workers to be able to engage with.
You're absolutely correct, right? So what you're saying is just because there is an employee break room in the real office doesn't mean that when we design the metaverse space for our team, there is an employee break room in the metaverse. But
Exactly.
that's that one-to-one thinking is that's what we tend to think about. I did see a startup that was trying to offer that serendipity through like a Slack bot. And I can't go further into that, but I do like the suggestion that uh, it doesn't have to be one to one. Like
Hmm.
in the real world, serendipity happens around the water cooler in the office, but in the virtual world, serendipity can happen. We can imagine it. Do you
Exactly.
have any ideas of of how that could happen?
No, I mean, honestly, this is gonna sound really weird, but like every time I think of the metaverse, my brain is like, oh, we're just like astronauts floating in outer space, which is probably not. And I'm just like visiting different planets within the metaverse to
Yeah.
interact with people or do different things, which I know is like a very out there,
Yeah.
but that's like my abstract conceptualized version of the metaverse. So
Right.
I don't
Well, I
know.
don't blame you for not having a detailed, uh, you know, description of the metaverse, because the metaverse was introduced to us at the end of 2021 by Mark Zuckerberg
Hmm.
in order to cover up that his company was doing a bad job with information distribution. But all of the work that Meta has done, and I'm like, this is a joke, I guess I've been developing over several episodes of Make Sense, but like all of Metaverse, Meta did is work that's dependent on the Oculus,
Yes.
and the majority of us. don't have an Oculus to
Yeah.
experience Meta's metaverse,
Yes.
right? And so in other episodes, we've talked about kind of how I had a friend who worked for Second Life for
Mm.
Linden Labs. And
Yes.
so, he's talked about, and this is a little bit of a playfulness that's nice, is, they had all their stand-ups in Second Life. And so everyone's showing up as a different avatar, and avatars could be like literal party animals, right? You could be a pit bull with a party hat.
Yes.
By the way, there's a whole subreddit called Pit Bulls and Party Hats. If that is your version of cuteness, it
Okay.
sometimes is mine. So,
Noted. I'm
uh,
gonna take a look.
yeah, yeah. So, like there is this potential that we could bring some playfulness into work. It doesn't have to be St. Patty's Day for people or Halloween for people to wear costumes and
Yeah,
stuff like that.
exactly.
Um,
Yeah.
Can you just tell us real quickly the one episode podcast
Oh
on
my
the
gosh.
technology of the Black imagination and anime? I would love a link to it to share
Oh my
in the
God.
show notes. Hey, you brought it up. Like you put it out into this world. So like what is it and when did you create it?
Yeah, so I created it when I was getting my MA at the School of Visual Arts, specifically in design research, writing, and criticism. And I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do my thesis on. I knew that I wanted to focus on a group that is historically disadvantaged in the United States. So I immediately went to Black Americans. And just for context, the reason I say Black Americans is I'm a first generation American. So there's a lot of context. From the Black American cultural diaspora that I'm not fully aware of, but I wanted to dive more deeply into. Um, and so one of the things I started looking at originally was kung fu movies. Apparently,
Mhm.
there was a kung fu craze in the United States, and then after it had died down with the general population, it was single-handedly kept alive mostly by the Black American population.
Okay.
Um, and so I started doing more research, interviewing people where they're like, "Oh my gosh, yeah, kung fu movies. I grew up on kung fu movies. Like it's a whole thing. Even took kung fu as a kid." And I was like, "Wait, what? This is fascinating." But then I was like, okay, I'm not super into kung fu, but I am into anime. So I wonder where anime comes in. So interviewed more people and people started talking about Dragon Ball Z, Sailor Moon, and I was like, oh my gosh. Even Wu-Tang Clan, they have like a book called The Tao of Wu, and there's literally a line where the RZA talks about when his hair is up in an afro, he feels like Goku, the main character from Dragon Ball Z. And I was
Okay.
like, oh, that's so fascinating. And then there kept being parallels and connections where it was like, anytime I felt oppressed, I felt like a superhero. I felt like I could do anything. So then I started to dive more deeply into race and anime, and then how imagination surpasses all of that, at least for Black Americans. So that's how I got there. And then we had to do a podcast for our thesis. So for my thesis presentation, I did like a 3D avatar where I broke down my research, looked at famous philosophers, tied it back to Blackness and imagination. And
Okay.
then for the actual podcast, I like pulled in snippets from like rappers and singers who made references to anime and lyrics, and went through the whole history of interviews and people that I spoke with about their connection with anime and imagination. So,
Sounds fascinating. Can
yeah.
I can I listen to it? Can we all listen to it?
Oh my God. I don't know if everyone can. I'm still very like shy about it. I can let you listen to it.
Okay, and maybe I'll report back.
Okay.
Uh, and then I'll let you know like how on brand it is for who you are today and
Yeah.
whether it should be, on the internet. I will tell you, my first foray to being on in internet videos, and this sounds salacious, it's not, is I traveled, I backpacked in 2010 and I had a handheld camera, a Kodak Z I8 or something, fun little
Mhm.
camera, and made videos. And anyone actually can go find my Vimeo account and see all of these videos from 2010 of me backpacking around the world. And I experimented, not purposely, but when I look back at the body of work, like
Mhm.
there's the I experimented with a bunch of like styles, right? Like, so I have like a music video, like a kind of time lapse speed thing in Istanbul with like a really funky song. I have one that's a little more like national, not National Geographic, but kind of like a little sad that is in Siem Reap at Angkor Wat in there, you know. So, um, so there's like a lot of different like fun, playful like formats. I have not yet figured out how to pull that into my 2023 brand of Lindsay T. Lady Engineer. So, internet, go look it up and put in the comments if you think any of those videos are worth bringing to the forefront. Some of them, like, you know, got picked up on blogs. I have like
Nice.
graffiti videos from Paris and from Philadelphia. So I have a skateboarding video. That's it. I did a skateboarding
Nice.
video in Wellington, New Zealand. I hung out at a skate park. So like there's like live
Wow.
action, there's music videos, there's kind of documentary, National Geographic. Uh,
Did you
so
skateboard?
what?
Did you skateboard?
I did not skateboard.
No, why
There
not?
is a video of me snowboarding in the
Okay,
Himalayas, though, so that's
sweet.
pretty. Yeah.
That's nice.
Cool. So, I really want to talk about product equity.
Yeah.
And so the next segment is from disruptive to disastrous. My guest and I talk about when technology backfires. I'm obsessed with the fact that the growth and innovation of the past 20 years has not actually resulted in economic productivity gains. So there are plenty of snafus to point out in product design and that go from disruptive to disastrous. So maybe you can tell us a story or give us an example and we can take it from there.
Yeah, sure. So when I think about product equity, I define that as specifically making sure that the products that we're building are inclusive for people from all walks of life. Um, of course, I know that some people listening to this will say, well, you know, your target market can't be for everyone, so it's not going to be inclusive for everyone. But I would actually push back on that and challenge that you can focus on inclusivity for everyone. Um, it's kind of like how we do it in the physical world, right? So when you are walking on a sidewalk and there's a dip in the sidewalk for, say, a wheelchair, that dip helps you if, for example, you were to break your leg. It's easier for you to get up on the curb because there's that dip. So there's just this general understanding that when we focus on equity for all, it actually, for even just for the most underinvested group, it actually helps everyone. So with that in mind, one example that I like to think of is there was a client I was working with, specifically where I was doing UX writing for them, and it was a hospital, and they were building out an app, and in the app they had this line that said gender, male and female. And so I went to the designer and I said, "Hey, what do you mean by male, female, gender?" And he was like, "Oh, yeah, you know, duh, it's just gender." And I was like, "Okay, I hear you. I think what you're actually trying to say is sex because gender is a spectrum. And so I want to make sure that we're using the right language in terms of what we're doing here for this particular interface." So he's like, "Okay, cool, I think I get it." And I was like, and by the way, when we change it, it should be assigned sex, not just sex." And so he goes back, goes to the drawing board, comes back, updates the designs, and it says legal sex. And I was like, "Oh, okay." Um, legal and assigned are not the same words, and they have very different definitions. Um, so I actually had to break down to him why I was telling him to use assigned sex instead of gender or legal sex. And the context here matters. Like I would not have this conversation with a collaborator if the organization was based in a very conservative state, like say Alabama or Texas,
Mhm.
but this was a company that was based in California. Whereas in California, you can update your driver's license to be male, female, or non binary. So I wanted to make sure that we were holding space for the laws of California, which don't apply to an app, but you told me that you wanted to be innovative. You told me you wanted to be inclusive. So let's think outside of our context and think about the broader cultural environment that we're
Right.
in. Um, and then also making sure that we are holding space for the system that currently is just a binary, but then making sure that we're creating options for people to self-identify however they want to. So I broke down the law for him. I told him what the differences were between assigned and legal. And then I also told him that we need another field that allows people to choose their gender identity. So we've got assigned sex, and then below that, gender identity. And then it would be a drop down with predetermined options, but with the option, if you can't find what you're looking for, to type what you want in to self-identify. And that does two things. One, for the assigned sex, male or female, if you are an insurance company that's trying to pull that information, you can, and you haven't done anything with the third gender of non-binary in California, at least you have the needed options of male and female.
Mm-hmm.
And then the second thing that it does is that if I'm someone who's genderqueer, which I am, and then I go through the process, I'm like, okay, assigned sex, annoying, sure, male or female, I'll pick one. But now I can actually self-identify so that when I go into the doctor's office, they can talk to me in a way that identifies with the gender identity I've chosen.
Yeah. Right. Exactly. So the what okay, so what I am hearing from you
Mhm.
is that young early stage startups that really have to get niche in who they're actually targeting and designing for can still have without blowing up their product strategy
Mhm.
can make small choices that have big impact,
Exactly.
right?
Mhm.
So we're not redesigning the entire sidewalk. We are
Mhm.
just putting in the ramp on the corner.
Yeah.
Um, so things like updating your questionnaires,
Mhm.
um, and this is something that I've been aware of because I love surveys. I love creating them
Mhm.
since like 2017 because I worked with a startup that was helping the LGBTQ community find doctors that they felt safe with.
Mhm.
A lot of people in that community will avoid going to the doctor because they and put off what majority of people think just like routine visits, but put them off because their physician didn't it isn't sensitive and in the know of like how to talk to them. um but there's also things like alt text for images
Yeah.
to support screen readers. That's like that's not like now built right into PowerPoint where every time you drop an image it asks you for the alt text.
Mhm.
And any other kind of ADA type compliance to help with again the screen readers that can adapt to other ways of consuming information besides
Yes.
eyes and ears, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so that's awesome because I wanted to give an example. I would love, and this like we might not agree or we like it'll be an interesting conversation.
Mhm.
So there's some startup founders that still that believe they can launch a new dating app, and there are some, but it's very hard because you have to get density of a lot of people in one region to
Yeah.
get on that app for anyone to have a good experience.
Mhm.
Um, that's a very simplified kind of the user acquisition challenges of a dating app.
Yeah.
So it can further complicate the user acquisition and design of a dating app or abstractly marketplaces, but dating apps specifically, if you're trying to target or design for heterosexual relationships versus homosexual and anything in between.
Mhm.
Um, because if you want everyone in, let's say, Philadelphia to get on the app, you still have to have like two different marketing campaigns,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
And I don't think like Grinder had their go-to-market strategy with mostly gay men. And I'm not a historian in this area, so if I mess, you can hear me like being hesitant, like with my word choice, right? But I'm pretty sure Grindr started with gay men. They were not trying to include heterosexual men because that was their value proposition. And then, I don't, Tinder probably launched originally for heterosexual relationships and expanded. And I know I've seen in other apps. Anyway, what I go back to is entrepreneurs always at the earliest stages are like, I imagine everyone. And you
Mm-hmm.
and I, parts of our job is to say, you can't be everything to everyone.
Yes.
That's how you overbuild and fail,
Exactly.
right? So, and when it comes to marketplaces like a dating app where you need density, and the more aspects you include, the harder that becomes,
Mm-hmm.
right? So what do you think when it comes to like a dating app? Do they launch if the founders are like, no, we want everyone to feel comfortable on the app and they have not acquired any users? What would your advice be? Is that an
Yeah.
issue of product equity, or you think product equity is really about like usability and accessibility?
Yeah, for me, it's more usability and accessibility, and it depends on what the context is. So for this context, it's a dating app. Um, Depending on if they said that they wanted it to be for everyone, then I would challenge them to start telling me about who's the target market, where are you located, where are you launching, because it also depends on the data and the types of people in that area. And so it's not necessarily just, it's not equity is not about blindly, or I shouldn't say blindly, just like not thinking about the strategy overall for the product and just throwing things and saying it's equity because that's actually not equity.
Hmm.
You have to be thoughtful about where you're applying that product equity so that you can make thoughtful choices that are truly inclusive.
Hmm. Right.
Yeah.
Great answer. You can also say in this example, and I had this conversation earlier, and it's a good point for anyone out there as innovators, leaders, when putting new solutions out there or new businesses. The dating app example can focus all of their outward messaging, all of their marketing efforts, where they choose to show up, can focus all of that on heterosexual people in Philadelphia. This, again, example.
Hmm.
Uh, but they can still make the sign up form accessible for anyone that it does not identify as that to sign up,
Exactly.
right?
Yep.
And
I
that
mean,
part is the product equity, the
exactly.
strategy and saying the intention of how we're going to target and acquire people. Like our focus is on density in this user segment. But I'm
Exactly.
also cool if other people sign up.
Yeah, exactly. And I think a big part of it is thinking through, at least for a dating app, is thinking through the values and the psychographics of the market that you're going after. So if you are going after heterosexual people, let's just say in Philadelphia, to your point, and I am a trans man who is signing up for the platform, like, do I put that I'm a trans man or do I put that I'm a man? Because a trans man is a man, but to straight people, some straight people,
Yeah.
a trans man is not a man. And
Right.
so as a straight person might want to know, like, is this person in my definition a man or a trans man? Which if they don't think is a man, there's like a whole there's a quandary that goes into it ethically
Yeah.
as well. So I think the dating app is a really good example because it really just depends on like how people's perceptions are. Because I've even just as a queer person on dating apps, like I've had people who like I present as a woman, and then they'll be like, "Oh wait, you're queer?" And I'm like, "Yes, but I still date men."
Right.
And then
Right.
they're like, "Oh God, oh," and then they'll just like block me and stop talking to me. And I'm like, "Oh, that's so fascinating. That's so interesting." So I think that there's a really interesting dynamic with the dating app in terms of inclusion that you want to be careful of because it could also put queer people in danger depending on how you put it together.
Yeah. The something similar happens with like political choices.
Yes. Hmm.
Someone, I'm not gonna hide that I'm liberal and socially forward. Um, and a guy had moderate on his profile, and I asked him what that meant.
Hmm.
And it was obvious that he had gotten that question a lot before because he didn't like it because he was like, you know what that means. And I'm not going to justify my beliefs and then, unmatch me. Right. So a lot of these, and this would take the conversation in a totally different direction about these different things that facets that dating apps capture that can be extremely divisive.
Hmm.
I think just to circle back, I hate that word. Why do I use it? This example is like, okay, the startup strategy is casting a net, and it's clear to the audience that their focus is on like heterosexual couples in Philadelphia, for example.
Hmm.
And a trans man, if he decides to sign up for that, hopefully the startup has given options that are equitable as far as gender identity
Hmm.
and preferences. At the same time, as a person who's signing up for something where like the messaging is clear who's it for,
Hmm.
there's a equal match of like personal responsibility of what you're coming in for.
Exactly.
But again, let's just sum up product equity. Oh, and I told you this over email. I asked ChatGPT what product equity is,
Oh my gosh.
and
What'd it
and
say?
it's great. Everyone knows from this show that like my foray into video podcasting with Make Sense has made me into a chat GPT nerd because my very first guest said it was her robot thought partner. And
Oh my
I was like,
gosh.
let me check this out. So I asked what product equity is, and ChatGPT came back right away saying it had something to do with brand equity, right? So a company has a brand, and that brand is worth some value. We call it brand equity. Uh, and a product is offered by that brand, and does that product reinforce brand equity or not? So it was a very marketing branding concept.
Yeah.
And I replied, well, I thought product equity had something to do with maybe the digital divide and other social issues. And they're like, thank you for correcting me. You are right. And then went into sharing a few paragraphs about product equity. To be honest, it's just like going on Google and searching just product equity, getting all this brand stuff back, and then being like, okay, Google doesn't know. So I'm going to put product equity plus
Yes.
social plus digital divide
Yeah.
plus, and see.
Exactly. That's pretty
Gives me
fascinating.
like one last remembering, back in 2010, 11, we were only like 20% of the population using smartphones,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
But there was a growing segment at that time of lower income people adopting smartphones quicker than
Hmm.
others because that was their computer.
Yes, exactly.
So I remember specifically Whole Foods at the time, their job application was only available on a web view. It
Mm.
wasn't mobile friendly, right? So that's an issue of product equity,
Yeah,
right?
exactly. Yep.
Because it's not being made available to um, a large part of the population that could make good employees, right?
Exactly. Yep.
Same with when stores are credit card only, right? That can
Hmm.
be an issue of equity as well and accessibility.
Yeah.
So it's a new to me term, but the concept of it, I think, we've been thinking about for quite a while. And
Exactly.
right,
I agree.
cool.
Yeah.
So, what do we need to make sense of? Commercializing Moon, bad. product equity, good, metaverse, professional, hopefully.
Yeah. Yeah, that sounds about right.
Cool. Awesome. I really enjoyed this conversation. I'm gonna have to get you
Likewise.
back on here because we didn't even get to talk about your open source design history
Oh,
textbook.
yeah. Yeah, yeah,
What is
yeah.
that? Is that a current project?
Yeah, it's a current project that I'm working on. There's still a lot of research that I need to do for it, but a lot of design history textbooks, when you are someone who's new to the field, especially if you go to a design school, like especially like a pedigreed design school like SVA or RISD, et cetera, they tend to teach you with this textbook called Meg's History of Graphic Design. And Meg's History of Graphic Design is, I would say, written from a very Eurocentric point of view in terms of what design is and who it came from. And so if you look at, say, the index and try to find examples of, say, Latin American culture's impact or Indigenous American impact or African impact, even Asian impact, it tends to gloss over those communities. But then there's a huge focus on Europe and like how Europe, changed the world of graphic design. Like you hear about Bauhaus and Paul Rand, and it's like, yes, those definitely had impact, but I'm pretty sure graphic design doesn't exist in a vacuum. And there were people who were doing it. It just wasn't called graphic design at that time. So what does that actually mean for the history of graphic design and what we're teaching? So that's kind of where the book
Hmm.
comes in, building a foundation that does include those cultures, and then allows people, once I exit the planet, aka die, if anyone was confused about that, it can still be built upon by other people so that it can get better and better and better as more people add their knowledge to this open source design history book.
What a cool project. And if there was a offshoot of that to cover user experience design,
Mm,
would be awesome. People talk about UX as if it came about just in the past 10 years, but
mm-hmm,
the study of human factors when it comes to digital interfaces has been going on since, I mean, I say 80s, but I would bet you that IBM was studying this stuff in the 50s and
mm-hmm.
60s, just the ergonomics of it. And
Yeah.
that's ergonomics is the word,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
So uh, yeah, we can talk about that when you get there. But if are you
Yeah.
looking for any specific expertise? Because maybe they're listening to this episode and could throw in with you.
Yeah, I mean, there's one resource that I definitely want to pull in, which is BIPOC design history. So if anyone's interested, they should take a look at that. That really just dives into different cultures that have been ignored and their impact on graphic design as a whole. So that's kind of where
Mhm.
I'm starting from. And if folks are interested, they're more than welcome to message me and we can talk more about it.
Cool. That's
Hmm.
awesome.
Yeah.
So I want to thank everyone for listening to Make Sense with me, your host, Lindsay Tabus, and guest, Amelie Lamont. We hope you enjoyed our take on product equity, commercializing the moon.
I'm
I know.
sorry.
Now we're going to go off into a tangent and start researching startups in that way. I didn't bring up immortality as a service, which is another 2023
Oh
trend.
my goodness.
I'd like to get the basics right
Mm.
first. So if you want to continue to be the smartest person in the room, hit that subscribe for next week's episode. I'm in the early days with this, and every subscriber on YouTube specifically makes a huge difference. If you don't know, Google runs ads on my video, but until I have 1,000 subscribers, I don't get paid for any of it. So smash that subscribe button. As always, you can check out all the links and resources in the show notes. Don't want to forget, Amelie, where can people find you online?
Yeah, so I'm on LinkedIn a lot, Amélie Lamont. You can find me. And then pretty much if you just search Google Amélie Lamont as well as userspacecraft.com.
Cool. Use the
Yeah.
Google. All right. As always, again, check all the links and resources in the show notes. That's all for this episode. Catch up with you next time. Thank you, Amelie, for joining me.
Yeah, thank you for having me. This was great.
Awesome.